The river used to sing, not loudly, not like the floods of the wet season, but in the quiet rhythm of flow and silt, a sound that lived between reeds and sunlight. Now it was silent. The water had shrunk to a thin, broken ribbon, barely glimmering beneath the haze of dust. The crocodile lay beside it, still and colorless, his cracked scales blending into the parched mud. He hadn't moved in 2 days. He didn't need to. Waiting was what he did best. Flies buzzed around his eyes, the sound sharp in the empty air. A heron stood a few meters away, motionless too, watching the same dry horizon. The two creatures shared no truce, only exhaustion. Across the wide plain, the heat shimmered like water that wasn't there. The crocodile blinked slowly. Somewhere beyond the cracked bed, men were working, their tools clinking faintly, metal against stone. He could smell them before he saw them. The scent was strange, oil, sweat, and something like smoke. Then he heard it, the hollow thud of a shovel, the scrape of buckets. The riverbank trembled lightly beneath the weight of their movement. The crocodile turned his head just enough to see them. 3 men, covered in dust, were digging into what used to be the river's deepest channel. They were widening it, reshaping it. The oldest one barked orders, his voice hoarse. Deeper. The machines will come next week. The machines. The crocodile didn't know the word, but he knew what it meant. Noise, vibration, the ground shaking beneath water that no longer flowed. He had felt it before years ago, when the river had first begun to thin. When the noise came, the fish left. The mud hardened. The reeds turned to dust. He had survived then. He would survive again. That's what his kind did. But the river wasn't surviving anymore. He crawled forward slightly, the movement slow, deliberate. His belly dragged through fine cracks in the dried mud. The sun burned against his back, dulling the faint green in his scales to brown. He reached the edge of what used to be deep water, now only a shallow pool, warm and thick with algae. A frog jumped from the mud and landed near his snout. It croaked once, a hoarse sound, then went still when it saw the eye watching it. The crocodile didn't move. There was no hunger here worth spending energy on. He turned his head again toward the men. They were still digging, slower now. The youngest had stopped, leaning on his shovel, staring at the crocodile. "Hey!" he called to the others. "Look!" The old man followed his gaze, squinting into the glare. "Ignore it," he said. "It'll move when it rains. If it ever rains again." The young one hesitated. "We're digging right into their nesting ground." The older man snorted. "There are no nests left. Just ghosts." The crocodile blinked once, slowly. The sound of shovels resumed, hollow and rhythmical. Dust rose in small clouds. The frog had vanished. The heron was gone. The crocodile stayed where he was. He could wait longer than any of them. Above, vultures turned in the heat, tracing slow circles against the empty blue. The riverbed stretched out like a scar through the land, dry, pale, and broken. The crocodile lay still, his shadow sharp against the stone-colored mud. He listened to the wind scraping across the shore. It made a sound almost like running water. Almost. But the river didn't move. It didn't whisper or ripple or breathe. It only pretended. And the crocodile, with eyes half open and patience older than memory, pretended with it. The first noise reached him before sunrise. A low, grinding hum rolled across the plain, shaking dust loose from the cracked riverbed. The crocodile lifted his head slightly, his nostrils twitching at the smell of oil and smoke. The air felt heavier now, not from humidity, but from weight, from movement that didn't belong to wind or rain. The men had returned. But this time, they weren't carrying shovels. The machines were enormous, metal beasts crawling over the dry soil, chewing it up and spitting it out again. Their wheels sank into the soft ground, their engines roared, and the earth beneath them shuddered as if remembering pain. The crocodile slid backward into the shallow water he still claimed. The mud sucked at his belly, warm and thick. He lay half submerged, watching through the glare. A line of men stood beside the machines, shouting over the noise. They wore bright orange clothes that didn't belong in the colors of this land. One of them waved his arm, signaling, and the engines grew louder. A deep scoop tore into the riverbed, flinging up clods of earth like entrails. The scent of metal filled the air. The crocodile stayed still, The water around him quivered with each impact. Hours passed. The machines moved closer. They were cutting into the river's old path, trying to shape it, straighten it, tame it. The men called it restoration. The crocodile didn't have a word for that. To him, it smelled of death disguised as progress. He remembered when the river was wide and deep, when the banks were lined with reeds, and the fish moved like silver veins beneath the surface. Back then, he didn't have to wait. The world came to him. But that was before the noise, before the dams upstream, before the land began to forget what water sounded like. Now, even the insects were gone. The youngest man, the same one who had seen him before, stopped his work and stood watching the crocodile again. His expression was hard to read from a distance, but there was something different in it this time. Not fear, not curiosity, maybe guilt. He said something to the others, but his voice was lost in the roar of the engines. The old man barked back at him, waving his arm angrily. The young one threw his shovel down and walked toward the water's edge. The crocodile didn't move. His eyes were half-lidded, his body one with the river's stillness. "Hey," the man said, his voice low, uncertain. He crouched, looking at the thin strip of water. "Oh, why do you stay here?" The crocodile blinked. The man sighed. "You should have left when you had the chance." He stood, turned, and walked away. The machines didn't stop. The noise deepened. One of them broke through a section of the bank, crushing a patch of reeds that had somehow survived the drought. Mud splattered across the crocodile's pool, thick and black. He raised his head, nostrils flaring. The water trembled, waves rippling against his sides, not from movement, but from vibration. Then came the spill. A pipe above the trench burst, spewing dark liquid into the riverbed. The smell was instant, oil, sharp and choking. It spread fast, painting the shallow water with a rainbow sheen. The crocodile hissed softly, a sound like steam escaping stone. The men shouted, scrambling to close the valve. Buckets clanged. Someone swore. The young man returned, his face pale. He threw down a tarp, trying to block the flow, but the liquid had already reached the pool. The crocodile backed away, slow, deliberate, until only his eyes and nostrils broke the surface. The rainbow film clung to his scales. It burned faintly. The young man saw him and froze. For a long moment, they watched each other. The man breathing fast, the crocodile not at all. Then, slowly, the animal sank. The surface rippled once, twice, then stilled. The man stood there, staring at the place where the ripples had been. Behind him, the machines roared back to life. The air filled again with heat and noise and motion. He turned his head toward the sound and muttered under his breath, "We're killing a river that's already dead." No one heard him. The crocodile moved silently beneath the oily water, deeper into the narrowing pool, until even the vibration of the machines faded. The mud pressed against his sides, warm and heavy. His heartbeat slowed. His eyes closed. He could wait longer than they could destroy. Above, the sky turned white with heat. The river lay still, and somewhere beneath its surface, the crocodile listened, not to the noise, but to what came after, the silence that followed the machines, the silence that always won. When the noise finally stopped, the silence felt wrong. The air hung thick with heat and dust, and the machines stood still along the bank, like dead animals, their metal bodies ticking faintly as they cooled. The men were gone. Only their footprints and the smell of oil remained. The crocodile rose from the mud. His eyes broke the surface first, then the ridges of his back. The pool had shrunk overnight, half of it gone, absorbed into the cracked ground or poisoned by the spill. The water that remained was darker now, slick with rainbow stains that shimmered under the sun. He lifted his head. The world looked different, smaller, as though it had curled in on itself. The wind stirred briefly, carrying the scent of metal and rust. The crocodile blinked slowly, scanning the horizon. The heron was gone. The frogs were gone. Even the vultures had left, their shapes no longer circling above the heat. Only he remained. He crawled forward, dragging his heavy body over the edge of the pool. Mud clung to his scales in thick layers that cracked as he moved. He stopped at the old river channel, now a dry scar twisting into the distance. The sun reflected off it harshly, like bone. The crocodile opened his mouth slightly, tasting the air. No scent of rain, no promise of return. The sky was endless and empty, a ceiling of heat pressing down on everything that still pretended to live. He began to move along the channel, not hunting, not migrating, just following the ghost of water. Each step left a deep mark that filled slowly with fine dust. The world was quiet except for the low rasp of his movement and the brittle rustle of dry reeds breaking under his weight. After a while, he came to a bend where the soil changed color, darker, smoother, almost soft. He stopped. There, lying in the dirt, was something that didn't belong. A reflection. A thin sheet of water, shallow as a breath, caught the sunlight in a way that made it seem alive. But when he approached, it didn't move. Not even when his shadow crossed over it. He lowered his head. The reflection looked back at him, not his face as it should have been, but distorted, warped by the oily surface. His eyes looked hollow, his body stretched, his mouth wider than it was. He stared for a long time, unblinking. The image didn't change. Then he moved his jaw, slow and deliberate. The reflection didn't follow. It was still like a painting of a thing that had forgotten how to move. The crocodile lifted his head sharply, hissed, a low, rasping sound that rolled across the dry riverbed. The reflection trembled but didn't vanish. The water didn't ripple. The river had stopped remembering motion. He turned away and crawled up the nearest bank, stopping in the shade of a dead tree. The wood was split from heat, the bark flaking off in strips. He rested his body against the roots and closed his eyes. Time passed. When he opened them again, the sun had dipped lower. Shadows stretched long across the shore, reaching toward him like fingers. The air had cooled just enough for the insects to return. A few flies, a single beetle dragging itself through dust. The crocodile watched them without interest. In the distance, a sound. Not the roar of engines, not thunder, something else. A cough. He turned his head. Near the half-empty pool, the young man from before stood alone. He was holding a canteen, his face sunburned, his hair matted with dust. His eyes scanned the riverbed until they found the crocodile. They stared at each other across the silence. The man raised the canteen, shook it once, then threw it toward the animal. It landed in the dirt with a dull thud, spilling a few drops of water. The crocodile didn't move. "You'll die here," the man said quietly, his voice hoarse. "Same as the river." He waited, but the crocodile gave no answer, no sound. Only stillness. The man sighed. "Maybe we both will." He turned and walked away, following the same path the machines had carved. His figure grew smaller with each step, swallowed by heat and haze. The crocodile looked down at the canteen. A single droplet rolled off the metal, catching the light. It fell into the dirt and disappeared instantly. He blinked once. The river gave nothing back, not reflection, not sound, not life. It only held what was left. And in that holding, it had become something harder than stone, something that waited without patience or mercy, just like him. By dusk, the air had changed again. It was cooler now, but thick, the kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. The crocodile lay at the edge of the empty riverbed, his body half covered in dust. The sky had gone pale, the color of old bone, and the ground beneath him trembled faintly from something deep within. He opened one eye. Far upstream, a sound. Not thunder. Something slower, heavier. The crocodile lifted his head. The earth gave a long, low groan that rolled through the cracked mud like breath through lungs that hadn't drawn air in years. Then, the first collapse came. A section of the dry channel ahead gave way with a muffled crack. The ground sank slightly and the dust lifted into a red cloud. Beneath it, something pale gleamed. The crocodile waited. When the dust settled, he moved forward, slow and deliberate, tail dragging through the cracks. The light caught the surface below the broken soil. Not rock, not clay. Something smoother, something shaped. He stopped a few feet away. What the river had hidden for years now lay open to the air. Bones. Enormous bones. They weren't crocodile or fish, or any animal he had ever known. The rib-like shapes curved deep into the ground, enormous and ancient, coated in the dry silt of forgotten floods. Between them, the glint of rusted metal, fragments of something human-made, buried and twisted by time. He lowered his head and sniffed. The smell was strange, dry, but not dead. It carried the memory of rain, of iron, of something once alive that shouldn't have been. A gust of wind swept down the channel, whistling through the exposed remains. It sounded like the river trying to speak again, using borrowed lungs. The crocodile stood still, eyes fixed on the white arcs beneath him. He didn't understand what he saw, but he felt it. The weight of it, the age of it. The river had never been just water. It had been hiding something, holding it down, keeping it quiet. And now, without its weight, the truth had surfaced. The crocodile shifted his tail, uneasy. The air around him vibrated faintly again. That same hum that came before the machines, before the spill. Only now it came from below. He backed away slowly, claws digging into the hard earth. The vibration grew stronger. A trickle of mud slid from the ridge above, falling across the bones. The ground moved. The hum rose deeper now, almost alive. The air trembled, and a thin crack split the dry channel wider. A puff of dust rose as the bones beneath shifted slightly, not from collapse, but from pressure below. The crocodile froze. Then, slowly, the noise faded. The ground stilled. The hum sank back into silence. He stayed where he was until the last vibration left the air. Then, cautious, he lowered